Hi everyone. Thanks so much for joining. I'm so excited that you've signed up to watch this webinar and really excited to talk to you about folate and folic acid supplementation today. So let's get started. Firstly, if we haven't met before, thank you for joining. My name's Amara, but you can call me Ami. And I started Food Baby after my own struggles to start a family. So like I'm sure is the case for many of you, my husband and I presumed that getting pregnant would be quick, easy, and even fun. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case for us. So we really struggled and were unfortunate enough to have 2 miscarriages as well along the way. So I found the process really difficult. One of the things that was hardest for me, being a sort of type A personality who likes to be in control and always have a plan, knowing that there was only a few days per month that you could actually try and get pregnant was really frustrating. And being a dietitian, I turned to the science around lifestyle and fertility pretty early on in the piece. And I was pleasantly surprised by how much you could do in terms of changing your diet and lifestyle in order to optimize your fertility. And that really helped me regain sort of a feeling of control of the process. There was things I could do every day that I knew would help me get pregnant and also to have a healthy pregnancy as well. So that made all the difference for me. And eventually, after sort of spending all my out of work hours deep in the research, I decided that it was something that I wanted to do more of. So I quit my job and ended up starting Food Baby so I could be sharing that knowledge with other people, which is what I do now. And rather than using a traditional one-on-one consulting approach, I do this using technology. So I have an online course which is about optimizing ovulation. And today I'm launching my supplement workshop, which I'm really excited about, and I will tell you all about at the end of the webinar. All right, so let's get into it. Folate. So folate is a B vitamin. It's also known as B9, and it's what's considered a water-soluble vitamin, which means that it doesn't stay in the body for particularly long periods. So research shows that after about 2 to 3 weeks of low intake, the levels in your blood are dropping. So it's something that you need to be consuming on a regular, preferably day-to-day basis. It's an essential nutrient, and it's needed to make DNA, for cell division, methylation, and homocysteine detox. So if we just look at those things in a bit more detail. So making DNA and cell division is obviously really important in very early pregnancy. So your baby starts off as just a few cells that divide and multiply very quickly. So there's a lot of making of new cells and DNA in that process. So the folate requirements at that time are really high. In terms of methylation, that means sort of turning genes on and off, and folate's important to make sure that the healthy genes that we're after are the ones that are turned on. And homocysteine detox. So homocysteine is an amino acid, and too much homocysteine in the blood is known to be really harmful for us. And folate, as well as some other B vitamins, are involved in switching that into a different compound which our body needs. So that's another really important role. The reason that folate has become so well known and is considered really the #1 most important prenatal vitamin is its effect on helping prevent neural tube defects. So the neural tube is the brain and the spinal cord, and that develops super early in pregnancy. So from conception to about week 13 or 14 is when it's happening. And you can get some problems with the neural tube developing, including something called spina bifida and something called anencephaly. And these can be really serious and can even be fatal. And we know that if you take folate supplements in the 1 to 3 months prior to conception, as well as the first trimester, that you can reduce your risk of having a neural tube defect by up to 70%, which is really huge. And so that's why it's so well known, and so many people advise you should be taking it in the preconception period. However, it also has some really cool other benefits, including in terms of fertility. So ovulation is an area that I'm really passionate about. If you're trying to conceive without using IVF, then you need to ovulate to do so. So even if you're having IUI, or if you're trying to conceive through intercourse, ovulation is key. So this is why I've made a course on ovulation, and folate is one of the things I do discuss in the course because it does seem to have a really big impact. So the way they kind of discovered this was animal studies show an effect of folate deficiency on ovulation. So there seems to be less ovulation if animals are folate deficient. But when they correct that deficiency, there are better hormone levels, less anovulation. So anovulation just means not ovulating, as well as bigger litter sizes. So then they looked at this in terms of humans, and they found that it seems to also have an effect. So the nurses study is a really famous big cohort study that was done, and they found that taking a multivitamin containing folic acid reduced the risk of ovulatory infertility, so not conceiving because you're not ovulating, by up to 40%. And this was a dose-response relationship, meaning the more you took your multivitamin with folate, the less likely you were to have infertility. And this was just up to 6 days a week. So if you're taking it 2 or 3 times a week, that was better than taking it once a week. But if you're taking it 6 times a week, that was sort of the best you could get. So it sort of emphasizes the fact that it's something you should be taking every day. And another study sort of confirmed this by just looking at the folic acid rather than the multivitamin. And they found decreased anovulation as well as higher progesterone, which is an important reproductive hormone, in people who had higher folic acid supplementation intake. So that's really good. So why would this be the case? In one of these studies, the authors suggested that ovarian response to FSH pulses is also decreased in low folate conditions. So that's very sciencey, but what it means is the ovaries don't respond as well to the reproductive hormones if there's low folate conditions. Another idea is because we know that low folate leads to high homocysteine, so it's not doing that detox we talked about. This leads to more inflammation and oxidative stress, which is harmful to the eggs and can mean that they don't develop and mature properly. Some evidence shows that having a high folic acid intake might lead to an increased chance of ovulating more than one egg, so having twins. But the evidence is a bit mixed for this. So don't worry if you'd prefer not to have twins. It's probably not going to cause you to have twins. But it does, that would support the idea that folate supports ovulation because you are ovulating more than one egg. And that matches up with those animal studies as well. Aside from ovulation, supplements seem to lead to a shorter time to pregnancy in women trying to conceive through intercourse. In assisted reproduction, higher intake of supplemental folate has been associated with more implantation as well as live birth rates. And in these studies, we really like to see them looking at birth rates. It's great if there's more implantation, obviously, but the real outcome we're all looking for is baby. So it's really great to see that they did look at that as the main outcome as well. And lastly, high folate doses seem to help mitigate the negative effects of toxins on fertility. So this is a really interesting area. So environmental toxins are known to be quite harmful to our fertility. but it's almost impossible to avoid them completely, especially things like BPA, which is used in really just everything. So from food containers to like sprays on furniture, it's everywhere. And it can be quite stressful if you're trying to conceive, if you're trying to avoid these these pollutants and these environmental toxins. So it's really reassuring that by following a healthy diet that includes plenty of folate and taking folate supplements, you can actually reduce the effects that these things have. So I think that's really cool and quite unexpected as well. So as well as improving our ovulation and our fertility, it seems that taking folate in the preconception period also increases our chance of having a healthy pregnancy. So a big study done in China with over 1.5 million women found that if you're supplementing 3 months before pregnancy, there's a decreased chance of miscarriage, stillbirth, neonatal mortality, as well as lower birth rate. And I think that's amazing and so exciting that there's something that you can be doing now before you even conceive that increases your chances of having a healthy pregnancy later on. So that's really cool. There also seems to be lower risk of gestational diabetes as well as autism spectrum disorder. And again, that's all if you're taking it before and sometimes as well as in the first part of pregnancy, but really important to start early. So if you're not taking folate supplements already, good time to start is today. All right, so folate types. So this is what we're all here for, folate and folic acid. So firstly, there's sort of two main groups of types of folate. So the first is synthetic, so man-made folate. And the main type is folic acid, and that's what we see in most of our prenatal supplements. In that category as well is folinic acid. So that's the active form of folic acid. So it's been metabolized slightly, but not completely. So it's not activated in our bodies yet. And then the next type is the activated form. So that is 5-methyltetrahydrofolate or 5-MTHF. It also goes by many other names. As you can see, I've listed them. So if you're looking on the back of your supplement, it could be written as any of those things there, but they all mean the same thing. And I'll refer to that as active folate or 5-MTHF. So the folate in food is actually a slightly different form, which is also called THF or tetrahydrofolate. So folic acid in supplements must be converted to the active form for the body to use. So there's two enzymes involved in this process, but we tend to focus on the second one, and that's called methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase, so MTHFR. Now, the gene in our body that codes for this enzyme, so that tells our body how to make this enzyme, is actually altered in quite a large portion of people. We think 30 to 50%. And if you have an alteration in the gene, it can be sometimes called a gene mutation or a gene polymorphism. So if you have one of the alterations, and there are a few different alterations you can have, it's considered having the MTHFR polymorphism. And what happens if you have this polymorphism is your body can't convert the folate or the folic acid to the active folate as well. So it reduces the available folate for your body to use for those things it needs, like DNA synthesis, cell division, homocysteine detox, which also means it leads to a buildup of folic acid in the blood and of homocysteine. So folic acid buildup in the blood has been suggested to be harmful. We're not 100% sure if it is or if it isn't, but we do know that a buildup of homocysteine is harmful. So research studies have found that supplementing with the 5-MTHF rather than folic acid, so the active folate rather than the synthetic folate, folic acid, has been found to be more effective at improving folate status. But the problem is it hasn't been studied in regard to preventing neural tube defects. And the way it works in terms of research is that you have to get ethics approval to do a study. And since we know that folic acid has such a dramatic impact on reducing neural tube defects, you can't tell people not to take it and to take something else in a study, because that's considered unethical, particularly with a population like pregnant women or women who are about to be pregnant. So there's not really ever going to be good quality studies that compare the two, just because the evidence for folic acid is so good. There's no reason to think that 5-MTHF wouldn't be effective at preventing neural tube defects. In fact, it might even be better, but there aren't studies to show us that. So what should you do? So if you know that you have the polymorphism of the MTHFR gene, you're very, very likely to benefit from taking the active 5-MTHF rather than folic acid, because we know that you won't be metabolizing most of the folic acid, and you'll be getting that buildup of folic acid in the blood and homocysteine in the blood, and they could be causing harm. You also won't be getting the folate you need to do all those really important tasks in your body. But the current guidelines for the general population, so without known polymorphisms, so maybe you have it, you just haven't been tested, or maybe you don't have it, it's still recommended to supplement with the folic acid, and that's just about those neural tube defect benefits that you get. So it really is a personal decision. I generally advocate for doing a little bit of a mixture of both, and there's a few different ways you can do that. So you could choose to supplement with folic acid and make sure you're not taking too high a dose, because you don't want that folic acid building up too much in your blood, and be getting a lot of your folate through food. And although it still needs to be metabolized and broken down, it won't cause excess folic acid in the blood. On the other hand, you can choose to supplement with the 5-MTHF and the active form, but still get some folic acid in your diet. So most countries have fortification programs, and these vary a bit, but if you're having things like breads and cereals every day, then you would probably be getting some folic acid in through there. So you could be sort of hedging your bets that way. Or you can take one and then the other. So literally alternating days, folic acid and then activated folate. And when I first started trying to conceive, that's what I did. I wanted to hedge my bets. I wanted all those benefits of the studies I was talking about before. And I thought it was very likely I would get them from the activated folate, but you know, I don't. I'm a scientific person. There wasn't the evidence for that, so I did both. I later got diagnosed with the polymorphism and then switched to the 5-MTHF after that. But I was hedging my bets before that. Okay, so I just wanted to also touch on bioavailability, because one thing that you hear sort of in terms of the argument towards folic acid is that it's 100% absorbed, which is 100% true. It is, whereas the folate in food is less well absorbed, so more like 50% of it is absorbed in our bodies. But I think it's important to clarify that absorption and metabolism are two different things. So absorption is it being taken in by your body in your gut, and then metabolism is the process that then goes through in your body before it can be utilized. So the folate in food is often attached to other nutrients or other compounds, so it needs to go through a few steps before it can be released and then absorbed by the body, and then it gets metabolized. So whereas folic acid is just absorbed very easily by the gut. So that doesn't mean that it's actually more bioavailable, it just means it's absorbed better, and then it goes through that metabolism process I was explaining before. So I hope that makes sense. Let me know if that's not quite clear. In terms of interactions, sorry, in terms of interactions, folic acid supplementation can mask a B12 deficiency. So the advice is that they should always be taken together, and they work really closely together in the body. B12 is involved in that detoxification of homocysteine as well. And most prenatal supplements will contain the B12 as well. It can also interact with various medications, including common epilepsy meds. So always check with your doctor before starting a supplement, particularly if you have other medical conditions or if you take any other medication, because you just don't know how things are going to react. Okay, so who needs it and how much do you need? So the recommended daily intake, and this is based on the Australian figure, is 400 micrograms per day for women and 600 micrograms per day during pregnancy. Internationally, the guidelines for women trying to conceive specifically say that the supplements, so this isn't the total amount you should be having, this is just from supplements, per day should be 400 to 800 micrograms. And we know that certain groups need higher doses. So for example, if you've had a family history of a neural tube defect, if you have diabetes, various digestive disorders, things like Crohn's, celiac disease, IBD, if you have a higher BMI, you're likely to need more, as well as those on certain medications and smokers. So usually it's recommended that you have 1 gram to 4 grams per day if you've got various conditions, and the 4 is for those with previous neural tube defects, and that's on sort of either the maternal or the paternal side. But the upper limit is generally considered 1 gram per day. So if you have a previous neural tube defect, you absolutely need to be talking to your doctor or dietitian about having that 4 grams per day. Now, all these are based on folic acid, because as I said, the guidelines for most people is to still take folic acid rather than the active folate. So how much should you be having if you're having activated folate? Well, there are guidelines that tell us how much. Some studies have found positive results at about 600 micrograms per day. Because it isn't absorbed 100% like folic acid is, I generally suggest staying on the higher end of this 400 to 800 micrograms per day. Although we know it's going to be metabolized better, so that might be unnecessary, but sort of better to be safe than sorry. If you're taking the 5 MTHF, then I would be looking at around 600 to 800 micrograms per day of that, and certainly more if you have any of these conditions as well. All right, so folate in food. Being a dietitian, I always like to talk about food because I think it's important that we think of supplements as our insurance policy, but food should be the main way that you get all nutrients, basically, including folate. So, good sources of folate include leafy greens and legumes, especially things like spinach and broccoli, and soybeans are a fantastic source, as well as chickpeas, kidney beans, lentils, peanuts. So particularly if you have kind of FODMAP issues and you find that legumes don't sit very well with you, peanuts and soybeans are a really great choice there, because you do avoid those kind of issues. As well as beetroot, turnip, everybody's favorite avocado, and liver. And just to talk about liver a bit, so liver is actually the best source of folate, because about 50% of our folate in our bodies, and other animals as well, is stored in our livers. So It's a really great source of folate. However, it is something you need to be careful of when you're trying to conceive, and even more when you're pregnant, because it can be a really high source of vitamin A. And vitamin A in this form is a fat-soluble vitamin that stays in our body for a long time. And too much vitamin A has been linked to birth defects. So you want to be conscious of how much vitamin A you're consuming in the lead up to pregnancy, and then definitely even more once you do get pregnant. But I think it's fine to include some liver in the preconception diet, because it is really high in folate, as I said, but also lots of other nutrients, because they're often stored there in the bodies, in our bodies and in bodies of animals as well. And then fortified foods. So different countries have different fortification programs. In Australia, we just fortify bread, except organic bread. So any bread that's not labeled organic will be fortified with folic acid. Other countries also fortify things like cereals and pasta. So it's a good idea to check and see what's fortified where you live, and what those kind of levels are. And lastly, the way you cook and process food has an effect on the amount of folate that remains. So we know that canning food really reduces the folate content. And this is especially important because legumes are such a key source. So I know myself and a lot of other people have a large proportion of their legumes in the canned variety, just because it's so much easier than cooking up dried lentils and beans, which can be really time consuming. So being, not to say that you shouldn't have the canned versions at all, but being conscious that you will be reducing the folate there, and maybe cooking them up from dried yourself when you can. Do note that if you're boiling something, because it's a water-soluble vitamin, the folate will go out into the water. So if you're making like a soup or a dal and you're using all the water that the legumes are cooked in, that's absolutely fine. But if you're, say, boiling your broccoli and then throwing away the water, then you're going to lose all that folate or not all of it, but a large portion of it in the water. So rather than doing that, it would be a better idea to steam or microwave, because there's very, very little folate lost if you do those things instead. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the folate content. Do let me know if you have any questions. I'll have some time to answer a few at the end of this. But I wanted to introduce you to my new Fertility Supplement 101 workshop. I'm super excited to launch this product for you, because I get asked about supplements all the time. And since I can't sit down with each and every one of you, I have put all my knowledge together and put it all into this workshop. So you'll learn about the top 12 most important nutrients for preconception and for enhancing fertility. So it's quite similar to what I've gone through with folate, except for all these other nutrients as well. And so we look at what the scientific evidence says, how it works in terms of the biology, the food sources, and the interactions, as well as the types available, who's likely to need supplements, and how much, what all the guidelines say. So it's really comprehensive, and by the end of it, you should feel really confident in choosing a prenatal vitamin that suits you, is appropriate for your body, and doesn't sort of interact badly with what else you're taking. So it's going live next week, so the 29th of July, which is next Wednesday morning. And I'm offering a pre-sale now, which is only $59, and it'll go up after that. So you'll save over 10% if you buy it before next Wednesday. The workshop is really designed for somebody who is confused about what prenatal vitamins they should be taking. Maybe they've been told by their doctor to just take folic acid, but they've heard other supplements could improve fertility, or they're struggling to conceive and they want to sort of speed things up in any possible way they can, which was absolutely me. or maybe for somebody who's taking already a cocktail of vitamins that they've read about on fertility forums, and they don't really remember why or what they're taking or how they interact with each other. And I see this all the time, particularly on Instagram, people with just a rainbow handful of vitamins, and a lot of them won't be working together, or they might even be risking taking too much of a certain type. A really common thing I see is people taking iron and calcium together, and they actually interfere with the absorption of each other. So they're both really important preconception nutrients, but you won't be getting either of them if you're taking them at the same time. So yeah, things like that. So if that's you, then I think this workshop would be really beneficial for you. So make sure you sign up to get the pre-sale before next Wednesday. Alrighty, so that's all the content I have put together. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. So there's two ways. You can ask in the Q&A box, or you can ask in the chat. And if you ask in the chat, it just comes to me, and nobody else can sort of see your name and things. Or if you ask in the chat, if you ask in the chat, nobody else can see your name. If you ask in the Q&A, other people can see your question. So whichever you prefer. Just bring them up and have a look. Okay, so someone's asked, if you're having folate foods every day, do you still need a supplement? Oh, great question. So as I said, I do like to focus on a food first approach and have the supplement as an insurance policy. And if you are getting adequate from food, in general, I prefer you to do that and skip the supplement. However, when it comes to folate, because as I was saying, the folate in food is only about 50% bioavailable, and the amount of folate in food isn't that high, I don't think it's possible for most people to be getting enough folate in the diet. And I would be sort of recommending everybody has the supplement. So I was talking about leafy greens and legumes. So they are some of the best sources, and they have about 150 micrograms per serve of folate. So if you think about maybe you're only getting half of that, to be getting up to that 600 micrograms per day of folate, you're going to be having to have a lot of leafy greens and legumes. As I said, liver has a bit more, but then it's not something you should be really having every day. Definitely not something you should be having every day. And if you're having it once a week, you're not going to be reaching those recommended daily intakes. Yeah, so in this case, for folate, yes, I would recommend supplementing even if you're having a really good intake through food, just because it's such an important nutrient. We know it has so many benefits. Okay. Nothing in the Q&A. Just give people a few minutes. If there's any more questions. If you've got questions about the supplements workshop as well, feel free to ask them too. Okay, so somebody's asked, does the workshop cover CoQ10? I've heard it's important for egg health. Yes, that is one of the nutrients that is covered in the workshop. There is some evidence around it for egg health, but more for certain groups rather than sort of for the population as a whole. So I'll go into that obviously in lots of details in the workshop, but it might not be necessary for you to take it for your egg health, because the evidence seems to suggest only certain people really benefit from it. Okay. And somebody else is asked, how long does the workshop go for? So I haven't done the recording for it yet, so I don't know. I would say between 1 and 2 hours, but I think it's going to be closer to the 2-hour point. It is broken up, so the software I've used breaks it up into the different nutrients, so you can sort of watch one at a time and come back later to finish it if you like. It's been really hard because there's so much to say on all the nutrients. I could talk about them all day. So I've tried to make it kind of more manageable. So hopefully, yeah, between 1 and 2 hours, probably more like 2 hours. All right. And just to let you know, with the workshop, I will be putting that on the website and on my Instagram, and I'll send out the details in an email as well if you are interested in that. Okay, I don't think any more questions have come in. Just give it one more minute. All right, so we might leave it at that for now. Thanks everybody for joining. If you're watching the replay of this and you have questions, please feel free to email me or DM me on Instagram. It's been really great, and I look forward to doing another one of these soon and seeing hopefully lots of you in the workshop as well, because I think it'll be really beneficial for anybody trying to conceive.